Hello, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Transfigured. I am here with Johnny Barnes, and I am excited to talk with him. Johnny, if you know him, is probably most well known for his work on the Biblical Unitarian YouTube channel. Not the Biblical Unitarian YouTube channel, Biblical Unitarian channel in quotes, the one that's called that, because
Well,
I
no,
believe.
it's actually Dustin's is the Biblical Unitarian podcast.
All right. So there's the
Yeah.
Biblical Unitarian podcast, which is Dustin, and then there's Biblical Unitarian, which is Spirit and Truth. Or wait a minute, am I getting that? Who exactly? Yeah. How about
Yeah,
I just ask you that? It's Spirit and Truth Ministries, right? That runs
yeah,
that.
yeah. Technically, like, kind of owns,
Mhm.
the domain or whatever. Yeah.
But Johnny has a pretty amazing story. He does work on translating the Bible. And so we're going to talk about all of those things. I think mostly Johnny's biography and story is really a pretty inspiring story that a lot of biblical Unitarians can relate to, even though the details and stuff are also pretty unique and special to him. And then we'll talk about some of the work that he's been doing since. But anyway, welcome to the channel, Johnny. Anything you want to say before we get going?
Yeah, just really happy to be here. Thanks for inviting me on. And I love your channel. I think there's a lot of really amazing stuff. I love how you're always so patient and kind with pretty much all your guests. So really, really look up to you in that way. And I'm excited to be here. So
Well, sometimes I feel like I am tempted to lose that patience, so that's important to remind me that that's a good thing to do. Um, so, Johnny, tell me about, like, what was your faith upbringing like when you were a kid?
Yeah, so I pretty much grew up in like a Southern Baptist church. Both my parents, took me to church, Christian parents. Um, I I definitely believe I had a fake faith. I think I really wanted to appear good on the outside. I wanted to be the good kid everybody loved, but on the inside, I could really like essentially I was what you would call a whitewashed tomb. You know what Jesus called the Pharisees. I looked good on the outside, but on the inside, I think I was broken. Um, so that's kind of my upbringing. But yeah, so raised in Southern Baptist Church, a small town outside of Fort Worth in Texas. Um, and then I became a Christian in college. So we could get more into that if you want to.
Yeah,
But
sure, go for it.
yeah, so I went to this really cool camp at Texas A&M called Impact, and it's basically a church camp that they disguised as like an incoming freshman camp for college students.
So, like a pre-orientation trip that was actually a
Yeah.
Christian. Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, like they advertise it as like kind of a church camp, but I mean, it's like they advertise it's for freshmen. So it's like, hey, if you're an incoming freshman to Texas A&M, come to this. And so I thought that was honestly a really great marketing ploy because I mean, there's a lot of freshmen they just want friends. They're going to this new place, they
Mm-hmm.
have no idea. Um, so there, I saw some really genuine Christians, and I saw people worshiping God for real. And I could just kind of tell, like I was like, this is real. This just seems real. These people aren't faking it. They're not getting anything out of this. Um, and there were some other things that happened at that camp, but ultimately, I ended up, placing my faith in God and really seeing like, wow, God, I think you're real. I think this message of Christianity is true. Um, so yeah, that's kind of where my faith started. And then
What did you study in undergrad?
I did, well, I switched my major a bunch. I was very indecisive on what I wanted to do, but I ended up landing in manufacturing mechanical engineering. And I don't use it at all, obviously, today. But yeah, that's what I ended up majoring in. And I've noticed actually a lot of engineers either become Unitarians or are Unitarians.
Yeah.
So interesting trend there. But
Yeah, that there's a lot of STEM background in a lot of us. Like Sean Finnegan also had I think some amount of engineering in undergrad and was interested in that, and so it does seem to be sort of a group of former STEM majors.
yeah, yeah. So yeah, that was that. loved college, really grew a lot, I think, in my faith there. Really was passionate about God. A really great community of believers there. I don't know if many people know this, but when I was there, at least, this is probably, it was like 2012 to 2017, but there was, there's this little ministry called Breakaway that it was essentially a mini Passion Conference, if you've heard of the Passion Conference.
Mm-mm.
But essentially 10,000 to 12,000 people gathered in this basketball arena, like in the Texas A&M basketball arena, for like a Bible study and worship session. 10,000 students, like
once a year, or
no, this is every week
every week
on a Tuesday.
That's amazing.
Yeah, so there's just a huge Christian community there. I would say, like, for a public university, probably the largest Christian community, I would say, maybe at any public university.
That's astounding.
Yeah, it's honestly, like,
Yeah.
it was really, really cool. Like, if you ever had the chance or get the chance to go to one, it was really, really cool. I'm not sure how many people go now, but when I was there, it was very popular.
So how do you have a smaller community? It's hard to, you can't know 10,000 people. So how do you make your friends and have something more like a recognizable, smaller community in that?
Yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, I mean, yeah, you with every church community, you kind of find your niche or your niche, whatever you say it. But yeah, so I actually did impact. I served as a counselor for the next few years for freshmen. That same camp for incoming freshmen.
Yeah.
So I did that, and that was a great way to. We had a tight little community of leaders there. So yeah, that's kind of how I had my community, and obviously in the local church too. So.
So, did you any more kind of moments in your faith in undergrad, or is that it was pretty smooth sailing once you were involved in that ministry?
Yeah, pretty smooth sailing. Yeah, definitely just grew in my faith, loved it. I started a Bible study and stuff in college, really loved that. And we could flash forward post college. I became a youth pastor, and because
what sort of church were you working for?
It was actually a Presbyterian church, but at the time, I literally told them, I'm like, "Hey, I'm not Presbyterian," but they were like, "Oh, it's okay. Like you're just the youth pastor, so like you just as long as you love them." And I was like, "Oh, you sure? Like,
you're just raising the kids in the faith. It doesn't matter if you're our denomination or not."
Yeah, definitely probably a red flag. I mean, I wouldn't design a church like that. I'm thankful that they hired me, but at the same time, don't know if I would do that. So yeah, worked as a Presbyterian, worked as a youth pastor for that church. But I felt like I was leading people, and especially the students. I was like, man, I feel like I'm teaching y'all, but I feel like I'm teaching a very shallow faith. I feel like I just need to learn more. So that's why I decided to sign up for seminary, and I went to Dallas Theological Seminary. So yeah, I was there for 4 years. And
how did you pick Dallas Theological Seminary? Just because it was local? I mean, it is pretty well known.
Yeah, pretty much. Essentially because it was local, and I was like, man, this is one of the best seminaries in the world. It's right on my doorstep. Why not? I actually wasn't a dispensationalist or anything like that, but I was just like, man, I get a chance to be taught by some of the leaders in the evangelical world. So I was like, why not? How could I pass up this?
Yeah. So, and was your goal to become a pastor, or it was just sort of vague? Maybe, you wanted to be a pastor?
Yeah, that's a great question. Honestly, I really wasn't like, man, I really want to be a pastor. I really want to lead. I was more so just like, I think I just need to learn more. So yeah, that was really my heart behind it. I really wasn't intending to become a pastor. But yeah.
And did you like taking classes at Dallas Theological Seminary?
Yeah, I did. I think, yeah, I learned a lot. Probably the classes I learned the most and would recommend to people the most were the language classes, like Greek and Hebrew. I think those are the things that you're not going to get anywhere else. Yeah, I mean, so essentially your systematic theology classes, your classes where you study church history, you can do a lot of that on your own and do it almost better in some ways. But the languages, it's good because it forces you to like, hey, I'm going to learn this. I'm going to spend time doing this. So if I always tell people like, hey, if there's one thing you're going to study, one thing you're going to take time to do, try that. Try the languages. Try spending time doing that, because that's something you can't really find anywhere else in a book.
Mm-hmm.
And you can teach yourself in a book, but it's pretty difficult.
Yeah.
So
when did you start having thoughts related to the Trinity during this process?
yeah, that's a great question. So essentially, I would say the first doctrine that I kind of disagreed with the majority on after looking at it for a while was annihilationism.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So, obviously everybody in the evangelical world and the Southern Baptist world is pretty much an eternal conscious torment person. That's what you believe, that's what you teach. And I kept reading the Bible and I kept realizing, well, life is always contrasted with death, not life with life and
Bad
suffering.
life. Yeah, not good life and bad life, or
Yeah,
blissful life and suffering life. Yeah.
exactly. So I was like, this just doesn't seem right. I ended up looking a lot into it, did a lot of studying on the Rethinking Hell website. That was a
Yeah.
good website for me in that study. And I ended up, changing my mind totally on that. And one of the things I always try to throw out to people on that one is, if our punishment for sin is eternal suffering, then Jesus didn't pay for our sin, because he did not eternally suffer. So, and I know they like to get around that. There's ways they can get around that, but to me, it's just clear cut. It's just clear. It's exactly what the Bible teaches. Jesus died for your sins. He didn't eternally suffer.
What were the reactions like from your friends or your teachers changing your mind on that particular question?
Yeah, I actually tried to talk to one of my professors about that pretty thoroughly, and I was honestly very underwhelmed about how much he knew about the subject and his answers, because I had some pretty serious questions. I was just trying to learn more. Pretty underwhelmed. So that kind of discouraged me from like going to professors with all my questions. Honestly, I found that the internet or experts on certain topics were probably better go-tos. So yeah, that was kind of my experience with that. But yeah, I got a little bit of pushback for sure from my friends, just like, hey man, this is just that's not what anybody else believes. So that was kind of a good first step of like, hey,
Did you know anyone in real life who also believed that?
Honestly, at the time, I think I might have convinced one or two of my friends, but overall, no, nobody that I was like really close to.
Yeah. And I think that's just sort of like a fascinating window into the weirdness of our sort of current situation, where these big institutions that sort of have kind of the responsibility and reputation for teaching people are sort of being outflanked and outcompeted by all the resources of the internet and people who are willing to be autodidacts and teach themselves and find their own answers. And like that situation like captures that perfectly.
Exactly. I think it's a shocking, I mean, the internet is a powerful thing, and it's a shocking time we live in that I think arguably you can find better answers in a lot of ways through the internet than you can through an institution. Because an institution can't be an expert on everything.
Right.
So it was really interesting. But yeah, so that was the first thing. So I say all that to say it is kind of almost smart and wise, and maybe this is how we could approach some of our Trinitarian friends, is maybe getting them to see like a first smaller step is wrong with evangelical Christianity.
Yeah.
And then they might be more willing to take a step like the Trinity, because that's just obviously a huge hurdle. So.
Unfortunately, I don't think Chris Date is in any hurry to join our team, the kind of the leader of Rethinking Hell. I get the strong impression he's not, but I do think that it does surprise me. It's like once there's one crack sort of in the system, and you do the thing of, wait a minute, these words don't mean what I thought that they meant. Let me go through church history. Oh, wait a minute, that's not what I expected to see. And that idea that the majority can be wrong about something for a very long time. It's a very similar framework. But oftentimes, I bet that there wasn't any pressure on you to get kicked out for changing your mind on that particular question.
Nope, not at all. They didn't care. Right. I mean, it was literally they actually had DTS had 7 essential doctrines. annihilationism, internal conscious torment, that's not part of it. So
Right.
literally it's just, you're free to believe whatever. It's just so interesting how there's such a, I mean, that's just a strict cutoff, right? Like I could have some really crazy views, but as long as they're not part of the 7 core, you know, it's fine. It's totally fine.
Maybe their 7 core would say something like Jesus will return to judge the living and the dead, or something like that. And there might be
actually,
a reference to the word judgment, but it doesn't maybe specify what that judgment could or could not be.
Yeah, I don't think that was part of the, it was something very similar to what you said. So yeah, that was, so essentially I we had a whole class on the Trinity at DTS, and they made you take it. I think every student had to take it, I'm pretty sure. Which is rare. I don't think many institutions have a whole class just devoted,
rare.
Devoted to that. I think a lot of classes will have, I guess it was technically on the doctrine of God, but really it was Trinitarianism. So in that class, I've told this before. I think I told it on Dale's podcast. So if anybody is a returning guest, hopefully I don't bore you. But essentially, I was in that class and we were talking about the natures of Christ and how I believe it was the Council of Chalcedon, where you can't split apart the natures of Christ. They're indivisible. And my professor really put it, he said, he's fully God, he's fully man. They stand side by side. You can't split them apart, though, and you can't mix them. All those are heresies. If you split apart the natures of Christ, that's a heresy. If you mix them, I think it's like Eutychianism, that's a heresy. Yeah. So I was like, okay, I was just kind of thinking through it, and I was like, man, what do we do with the death of Christ? Because my explanation that I had always given and heard was, well, it was just his human nature that died. His God and divine nature could not die. Obviously, right?
Right.
And so, but I was wrestling with it. I'm like, this doesn't make any sense. This doesn't line up with what the professor's saying. That's splitting apart the natures. One nature is doing something that another nature isn't.
Right.
And so I asked the professor, I was like, hey, what do you do with that? What do you do with the death of Christ? And he said, it's a mystery. And even as a Trinitarian, I was like, that just does not add up. That does not sit well with me to say that the central act of the Christian faith is a mystery. That's not what I want to believe in. My faith is not in a mystery.
And not just like difficult to understand or so deep that it's hard to fathom the infinite meaning of it, but like it appears wrong and it appears self-contradictory, but we're just supposed to assume that somehow it works out in a way that we haven't understood yet, right? I feel like mystery can mean a lot of different things, right? Mystery could be something you don't know, that you just haven't heard, that you don't know, and so I feel like I one of my, I don't know, pet peeves when discussing with Trinitarians is like, what exactly do you mean by mystery? And it's like, because it is the crucifixion of Jesus one of those things that's so infinitely deep that we could write books and books and books on it till the end of time and never exhaust the subject. Like, yes. But that's different than saying it's an apparent contradiction, but we just have to swallow that one.
Exactly. Yeah. I think it's a really a mislabeling. You can call it a mystery, but what you really mean is it's a contradiction. We just don't want to explore it. And I always like to tell people with this, kind of in this realm of thought, you can understand God rightly, but that doesn't mean you can understand God fully. So people like to say, well, the Trinity is like, it's incomprehensible. Why are you trying to study God? Why are you trying to know God? I'm like, I'm just trying to know God rightly. I'm not claiming to know God fully. Like I can't fully
that's a good distinction.
Like fully understand what it means to be omnipresent. There's no way I could possibly wrap my mind around that. But like if that's my belief in God, I can still understand that rightly. I can have a right view of that. That doesn't mean I really understand the complexity and the depth.
And it's another example of that same pattern, because at the same time, a Trinitarian will say, if you don't understand God in a Trinitarian way, you are understanding him falsely.
Yeah.
But they're also not saying that they understand the Trinity completely. So that distinction between rightly but completely, that's a really good way of putting it.
Yeah, I think that's been really helpful for me. So yeah, basically that was the crack in the egg, and I just kept studying it. I honestly looked a lot at the Biblical Unitarian website.
So did you just find that through the internet, or like how would one even know to search for that? I guess.
That's a great question. I think I started wrestling through certain verses and was like, does this really say what I think it says? Like, as a Trinitarian, like John 8:58, the classic ones. And then I think I ran across the BU website, and they had some pretty interesting explanations that I was like, oh, this could explain it fairly well. And then I, kind of uncovered Bill Schlegel's podcast and Dale, and I don't think I had heard of your podcast at that time, but I'm glad that it's gaining a ton of traction.
I didn't start till late 2018. So if you're doing that,
I probably was 2021, maybe around that time, 2020. Yeah. So you might have been still kind of fresher on the.
Yeah. Anyway, I won't take any criticism or hurt to my pride for you not finding me first. Those guys are probably better at answering those sorts of specific questions anyway.
No, I mean, I don't know. I was kind of eating up everything I could find. I might have listened to some of your stuff, honestly. I don't really remember, but yeah, so that was it. And I just started studying it, really became convinced, like, man, this is right.
So another thing that I feel like can be difficult is when you're doing something like this on your own and you feel like you don't have anyone to talk to about it. It can be both exciting and kind of terrifying, and you like have almost this inexplicable urge to talk to someone about it.
Yeah.
So what was that like, kind of going through this in sort of real isolation while you're at Dallas Theological Seminary?
Yeah, that was really tough because, I mean, I was hearing people teach the Trinity constantly. I was hearing people laugh at other views like Unitarianism, and I'm just sitting there like, that's exactly what I believe, but I can't say anything. So essentially, yeah, I became a Unitarian about 2 years through or halfway through, and I basically just hid because I wanted to keep taking classes. And I'd already spent a lot of money and spent a lot of money on the classes already. I wanted to finish, get my degree. I did that. I ended up doing that and came back and told DTS, and they ended up revoking my degree because I was essentially a Unitarian. I admitted I was a Unitarian when I graduated, and you have to affirm the 7 core tenets of DTS before you can graduate.
Like right again, like at the end, right before you get your diploma, it's like not enough that you had signed it on your way in or something like that.
Well, you have to do it actually. I think it's every semester or every year, and at the end.
Wow, that's very thorough.
Yeah. So essentially, it's
like COVID testing you every
really
regular
is.
or something like that.
Yeah, because I mean, when I came in, I agreed with the 7 tenets for sure, and so it was. Yeah, it's a very awkward. I studied myself out of it, kind of, and what do you do in that moment?
So you're coming up right near graduation, and they're asking you to do your final doctrine test or doctrine agreement, and you are unable to sign it. But did they still give you your diploma at that point?
No, I signed it, and then I actually walked the stage. But then I felt convicted, like, man, I just don't want anything that they could hold against me and say, hey, you didn't do this. Like, I'm not trusting you because of this. So I went back and told them, hey, after I didn't actually believe in the Trinity when I walked the stage. And so, yeah, it was an interesting process.
Who did you tell? Like, did you go to the administration, or how does that even work?
Yeah, I went to the dean, I guess the academic dean. He was nice about it. But he was like, this is the first case we've ever had actually of somebody coming back and telling us that actually when they signed it or when they graduated, they didn't actually believe in it. He said, we have a lot of people after, say, I don't believe in this anymore. Because I think one of their doctrines is, inerrancy, things like that. And I think a lot of people who walk away from the faith, end up denying that. But so that was basically it.
And then they took away your degree because of that?
Yeah. So I currently, I don't have my degree anymore.
Were they mean or nasty about it, or were they? How's that
no,
work?
I mean, they weren't mean or nasty about it. I think it's just a flaw. Like it's a poorly set up system, and they're just following the system. So their system is you've got to affirm the 7 core doctrines. One of them, which is the Trinity. One of them, I think, is the dual natures of Christ. In order to graduate, in order to take classes each semester, that's the system they have set up. And I mean, to them, that's what it means to be a Christian. So I get it in a sense. They're essentially saying, hey, if you can't affirm these 7 things, you're not really a Christian. Now, I totally disagree with that, but that's what they believe. So I kind of get it. It really just comes down to a misunderstanding of what are the essentials of the Christian faith.
Yeah.
So.
And can you transfer your credits or do anything along those sorts of lines?
They did say I could. They said I could transfer my credits. But ultimately, a university, like another seminary, might take like 2/3, maybe half of the credits from DTS. They're not going to take 100% of the credits and say, "Oh,
and then just slap a diploma on you." Right?
Yeah, because they want you.
They're going to want some money.
Yeah,
exactly. out of the deal. Yeah.
So really, I was like, man, I don't know if I want to spend another 2 years to get the same degree I just got, and spend more money. Yeah. So ultimately, the place I'm at now is I'm just living life without a degree in that sense, without a master's.
I take it they didn't give you a refund either.
No, that was one thing.
They should have an orthodoxy guarantee or something like that. If they're going to test you every semester, they should also say, we guarantee you'll be doctrinally orthodox every single time that we ask you. And if you aren't doctrinally orthodox by the end of this, we give you your money back.
Yeah, that's essentially, I mean, you got the OxyClean guy. Yeah, that's basically what they're doing. Yeah, I think it's unfortunate. I think it's really unfortunate. Almost every seminary is set up that way too, though. So they're not unique in that. But yeah, I just think it's very unfortunate. Like it's very weird for a university, because this is the point of a university is to learn.
Yeah.
So if you're studying I passed all my classes, I did all the assignments, I learned what they wanted me to learn. But yet I'm still don't get my degree. I still get my degree revoked. It's just a very weird thing.
It is a weird thing because on one hand, I think like you and I could both understand that they want to protect their brand and that they want to sort of, I guess, protect their reputation, and they view themselves as making Christians that can serve in various respective positions, and that they are putting their stamp of approval on that. And so they don't want to stamp anything that they wouldn't be able to recommend for the normal sorts of positions and stuff that their graduates would take. But you're also right that it's such a weird situation. It's like, well, guys, you had me in your hand. You had full responsibility over my learning, and I got the grades. I answered the questions. I did the tests. I did the homework and stuff like that. How isn't this my degree now?
Yeah, it's just a very, very strange thing. Because in any other university, you do all those things, you've got it. And you do those things honestly, you got it. There's no like, oh, well, actually in your outside life, you're a bartender. So sorry, we're going to have to revoke your degree. It's like, what, that has no influence on, what you actually did at the school to earn the degree. So it's just it's a very complicated, topic. So
yeah, I bet there are some of the more liberal universities who wish they could take degrees away for things you tweet or stuff like that. But even as far as I know, they still don't or can't do that.
Yeah.
So then what was your life like immediately afterwards? Because I got to imagine that's not very fun, and that it's very discouraging, and that it would also, I assume, be hard with relationships with your friends and family as well.
Yeah, it was very tough. Yeah, we essentially lost almost all of our friends in Dallas.
So were you married at that point?
Yes, yeah. We had been married. I think we got married in 2018. So that was right after college. Right after college for me, before seminary. So yeah, we were married the whole time. So my wife also, her name's Chloe. She was really patient with me throughout the whole process, and definitely had a few freakouts. I mean, I had a few freakout moments. Like, am I going to hell? What is going on? I mean, at that point, I didn't believe in hell, but am I going to die apart from Christ? A lot of moments like that, a lot of discussions. But she ended up becoming Unitarian about a year after me. And yeah, I mean, she studies stuff now, and it's really great to see her faith grow as well.
No.
So,
I can speak from personal experience. When wives see Trinitarians treat their Unitarian husband poorly, it
yeah,
is perhaps one of the most strong apologetics there is for Unitarianism.
yeah, that's amen to that. And I could not agree more. But yeah, so essentially, we lost almost all of our friends. Lost our church. We got kicked out of our church. It was a Baptist church. Well, actually, I don't know if it was Baptist or non-denominational. It was kind of that quasi.
What did getting kicked out look like in that circumstance?
Yeah, so I met with one pastor that I knew fairly well. We told him the news, like, hey, we're Unitarian. This is what we believe about God. He took it well. He's a really great guy. He went and told the head pastor. The head pastor came back to us, had a lunch meeting with us. Essentially, it wasn't like a, hey, let's talk about this. It was like, y'all are removed. Please don't try to talk to anybody about this. You're wrong. You're leading Chloe astray. He turned to Chloe at one point during the lunch date and was like, you don't have to follow your husband. Like, you can leave him, essentially. Like, I don't know if he said leave him, but it was essentially,
it was implied, and
yeah.
if not explicitly stated. That is so icky and yucky. I don't. Oh.
Yeah, she definitely took great offense to that. Because she was also like, you didn't even ask me, like, did I study this issue at all? Like, he assumed that she just followed me and doesn't have a brain for herself, essentially.
Dehumanizing her in a certain kind of way.
Yeah, so that was very, very hurtful for her. So yeah, I mean, but we expected it. We expected to get kicked out.
Yeah,
I mean,
it's still no fun. I've had lunches like that before.
Yeah,
it's no matter how many times you've done it or how much you're expecting it, it is zero fun.
Yeah, my biggest frustration was with the whole thing was, one, he didn't want to debate it at all, and I'm not necessarily looking to debate, but he just didn't want to talk about it. And the second thing too was, he specifically said, don't talk to anybody in the church about this.
Yeah.
And my biggest frustration is just like, man, if you think you have the truth, why are you silencing people? Let them talk about it. Like, if you have the truth, you wouldn't be afraid of people talking about it.
Yeah. And hey, once I'm kicked out, what other leverage do you have over me, pal?
Yeah, I mean, I was just trying to be respectful, but yeah, ultimately he didn't have any power over me. I was just trying to be nice.
It's just one of those situations where I see this so many times where the Unitarian getting kicked out is more likely to follow the rules and be respectful and handle the situation with grace and Christ-likeness than the people handling the situation. And so it like enables the pattern to persist, even though I still think we're doing the right thing by turning the other cheek and loving when we're not loved and treating enemies better than they treat us, etc. It's just frustrating that pattern just happens over and over and over again, where people treat you very badly, but you treat them well back, and it enables that same cycle.
Yeah, it is tricky. Yeah, you don't want to be an enabler, but yeah, you want to walk with gentleness and do the right thing. It's a fine line. Yeah, that's essentially what happened there. So
did all of so oftentimes I'll hear that you'll lose a lot of friends in that process, but maybe not everybody.
Yeah,
and some people will hear about it, and it's sort of a separating the wheat and the chaff in your friend circle sometimes.
Yeah.
So what was that like?
It's a great point. Essentially, yeah, that's exactly what it was. And I mean, I think a lot of our friends were genuine friends with us. There's this weird authority dynamic where, once you start getting your salvation at play, people will just trust the pastor blindly. And so, yeah, they just essentially would cut us off. I'm sure their pastors warned them to stay away from us.
Yeah.
But we had one conversation with a group with our friends, and at first they were like, I was explaining to them Unitarianism, and then at first they were like, "This makes more sense than what I've been taught."
Yeah.
But then the next week they came back and said, "Sorry, we're full-blown Trinitarian. We can't talk about this anymore."
Yeah.
And
Oof.
I know exactly what happened, but
Yeah.
it's just so sad. I'm like, and like in your heart of hearts, when you read the Bible, yeah, Jesus is the Son of God. He's not God the Son. That makes sense. But then you just get immediately brainwashed again.
Right.
So
you they put the fear of hell in you, like literally in the most literal sense, and
in the most literal sense, yeah. So there was a few friends that stuck with us. Mainly, it was just due to apathy. Like they just didn't really care that we had changed our minds. So that was really it. Yeah, I mean, we had to me, I like to explain it like this. There's either kind of the apathetic people who just don't care enough, and they're not gonna disown you or be rude to you, or there's the people that are way on the other side that are way too caring, will disown you, speak poor things towards you, but then not actually genuinely look into it. It's really hard to find that person in the middle who's like, I care enough to study it, but I'm also not going to kick you out of my friend circle. That's a very hard person to find. And I personally think when you find that person, I do think they end up becoming Unitarian. It's very hard to find that person who's willing to look into it and face the consequences. So yeah.
So then it seems like a hard place to be in. You've had your degree revoked. You've been pushed out of your church community, and your whole career prospects had been built around this degree and what it would lead to next.
Yep.
And so how do you even decide what direction to head in?
It's a great question. So yeah, essentially that's exactly my headspace. I was like, well, I have no job opportunities and I have not no friends, but essentially no friends, no church. Very tough place to be in. So I ended up reaching out to Sean Finnegan actually, because I just, I knew of his podcast and everything. He didn't answer. And then Jerry answered actually, because Jerry works for the same church, and I kind of ended up building a relationship with Jerry, and he was like, "Hey man, we need a translator to help us with REV." And so basically, yeah, we just ended up building a friendship, and I ended up working for Spirit and Truth, and that's what I do today. And yeah, so it was just a strange, set of events, but God took care of us somehow. So.
Well, good. Well, so let's talk a little bit about the REV. What is it? What parts are you contributing to, and how's that been going?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the REV is the Revised English Version. It's a Biblical Unitarian, essentially, version of the Bible. We're not trying to be Biblical Unitarian. We're just trying to translate, but we all are Biblical Unitarian. We're not purposely trying to take out verses that like might seem to call Jesus God. So like, John 20:28, when Thomas says, "My Lord and my God," we don't change that. And it's like, oh, we can't have him possibly be calling Jesus God. So we gotta X this out of the text. So we're not doing that in that sense. We're just translating from a Biblical Unitarian perspective.
Right.
But ultimately, so we're a team of translators. It's as of right now, there's a lot of people who worked on it in the past. But myself, Jerry Weirwille, and John Schoenheit work on the New Testament primarily. And then typically John Schoenheit and Bill Schlegel will work on the Old Testament. Every once in a while, Jerry and I will hop on to help translate the Old Testament, but it's primarily them two. So yeah, it's a really cool, I'd say it's a one-of-a-kind project in which there's really no other Biblical Unitarian translations that are made with a team.
No.
And we don't all necessarily have the exact same theology. So I think it really helps refine the translation itself. You can't get away with your little pet verses that you're like, I really want it to be translated this way. And no, we all have to agree on it.
I think of it, and another thing that's really cool about it is like there's an app which I will link to, and everybody should download, and you can access it in a web browser too. Is that it's like Wikipedia, where if you guys feel like, oh, we learned something, we need to change the way we translated this verse, boom, it's done. And then that, will ripple down with a software update or immediately the next time you refresh the page or whatever, that it's sort of a continual work in progress, as opposed to like, well, this is the 1984 NIV and this is the 2001 NIV, or et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah. Yeah. I think we will eventually get to a place where we stop working on it, like, every day. But right now, yeah, we're updating it constantly. I mean, it's literally a click of a button. We just refresh the page and it's updated with, any change that we've made. So yeah, it's constantly changing. People want a hard version, like a hardcover version. But I just say honestly that I think it's
that locks it in time or something. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, it locks it in time, but also it's the only version we have is the 2014 version, and a lot has changed. So I almost don't even recommend that version anymore. I mean, you're welcome to do it, but it's just old. And I think we've all advanced. Even John Schoenheit, who has been working on it for that long, would say, we've changed for the better in a lot of passages. So
and I think that's a cool embrace of the new abilities of technology to do things that way. And you guys are a somewhat distributed workforce. A couple of you are in New York. I think Bill's in Tennessee, and you're in Colorado. So, this distributed team that's like kind of, it reminds me of like being on a team that's writing software code, right? Like I work at Google, and so sometimes to change like the actual software, it needs to go through an approval process, and etc. Like someone can report a bug, okay, then you fix the bug, here's the proposal, you put it through a test, enough people that have the authority agree on it, and then it gets pushed up to the real thing, and then the real thing gets beamed to all of planet Earth. And that it's like very similar to like a software project or something like that.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. And yeah, I really enjoy the team aspect of it. I in your heart of hearts, you're like, oh, I think I would do a great translation by myself, but it really is good to challenge each other. And I really do think it's much better than if I did it by myself, or if any one of us did it by ourselves. So I think it's a really, really cool project. But
that's great. Anything else you want to say about the REV? Like one example that I just thought of is that Sean Finnegan gives his presentation on Isaiah 9:6 at the UCA conference this year, and he only gave that presentation like the first week of October or something like that. And then you guys get together and huddle, and you're like, actually, that was pretty persuasive, Sean. I hadn't thought of that, and I don't remember the exact words off the top of my head.
yeah.
But then and then you guys are like, well, let's have a meeting about it, and we're persuaded.
Yeah, that's essentially it. I mean, I had read his paper, but yeah, I listened to it again, pretty stinking convinced that what he was arguing was right. Because I had argued previously that Isaiah 9:6 was about essentially that phrase, like, mighty God. There's a way you could theoretically translate it like mighty warrior, so it could be talking about Jesus. But honestly, it's a stretch in the Hebrew, and that same phrase, El Gabor, is used of God. I think it's in Isaiah 10, like literally the next chapter. It's really soon after that same word or same Hebrew phrase, El Gabor, the mighty God, is clearly used of the Father. And it's really used that way only throughout the Old Testament. And so Sean Finnegan's approach was essentially, hey, this is a theophoric name, that this is talking about. It's a name. Yes, they're giving the future Messiah. Some people think it's Hezekiah, but they're giving the future Messiah this name. But it's a name that describes God. Almost every single Hebrew name was a theophoric name. Almost every single one.
Right. Even Hezekiah is a Hebrew name.
It is.
I won't be able to tell you what it means off the top of my head, but I know that the Yah at the end is the abbreviation of the Tetragrammaton.
Exactly. Any Hebrew name that ends with an ah, exactly, is a theophoric name. It's Yah is something, or Yahweh is something.
Yeah. Samuel, my own name, also a theophoric name.
Yeah, exactly. So I just thought, man, that just makes so much sense. We don't have to stretch the Hebrew to try to make it work with Jesus. I think this is just a theophoric name. And I wrote the commentary on this and used a lot of what Sean had taught and what he had researched. So yeah, you can read it right there now. Now it says, our translation of Isaiah 9:6, the child will be born to us, or for a child will be born to us, a son will be given to us, and the government will be on his shoulders, and he will call his name. So the he there, it's not exactly clear who that is. Most people think it's Yahweh, but a lot of translations do that in the passive, actually. They just say his name will be called. But yeah, he will call his name. The mighty God is an extraordinary advisor. The everlasting Father is a ruler of peace. So the names are about God, not about Jesus.
They're somewhat long theophoric names. It's almost like a theophoric sentence, and then there's two of them back to back. But it just, like, once you see it, you're like, oh, it just, like, it's like scales falling off your eyes. It just sort of falls into place once you look at it that way.
Exactly. Yeah, and that last phrase too, the everlasting Father. Everybody has a problem with that, right? Like Unitarians have a problem with that. We're like, wait, how is Jesus the everlasting Father? Or how is he the Father of the age to come? That doesn't make any sense, really. Like, he's never really called the Father. Then Trinitarians also have a huge problem with it, because they're like, wait a second, Jesus isn't the Father, which Trinitarians often ignore that. But I think it creates huge problems also for Trinitarianism. So this to me just makes so much sense. It fits the context. It doesn't create problems. So yeah, I'm really, really happy with our translation here.
Yeah. And if you had a paper Bible from even a couple months ago, it would have said something different.
Yeah, exactly. That's the beauty and the problem of research, right? Like, it's beautiful because you learn more and you correct yourself, but it's hard because, in the past you might have taught things wrongly, or, not to. Yeah. So it's a humbling process for sure.
Sure. I'll include a link to the REV Bible in the description, as well as a link to Sean's presentation, in case you're wondering how it is that he came to that conclusion in that particular translation. I'll point to that. We don't need to do that full presentation ourselves. But one thing I did want to ask you about was that one of my favorite YouTube videos of yours that I thought was really good, and I believe I've shared it with a couple people since, is a video that you made. I think the title is "Every Time Jesus Was Called God, He Denied It."
Yeah.
And so can we talk a little bit about when and how and where Jesus denied being God? Because I feel like not only is that diffusing some of the claims where people might say Jesus cryptically or somewhat allegorically calls himself God, but it's flipping it from a defensive to an offensive argument.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, so I mean, there's a few places. Most of them are in John. Almost all of them are in John. Shockingly, right? But I mean, I also think John is a really interesting book because it contains some of the most, divinity-esque statements, but also some of the most Unitarian statements in the whole New Testament. So it's a really interesting book. I definitely don't think it teaches Trinitarianism, but yeah. So the main places I think are in John 5 and John 10, and I also talk about John 20:28 in the video as well. But I just think, to me, I think I just heard some Trinitarians throw around these verses as if, Jesus is clearly equal to God here, right? Like, this is a claim. And my point was, let's stop taking things out of context and listen to how Jesus responds to these claims. Because I think one thing that we have to be really careful to do as Bible readers is not just take a verse and think this means exactly what it's saying. Yes, that happens sometimes, but we have to remember these are describing events. So there's a verse that says there is no God. There is a verse in the Bible that says there is no God. But Paul's talking about, he's like, I don't know, I don't remember exactly what Paul says, but it's something like, you've heard it said there is no God, or I don't remember exactly what he says. But if we just take that word and we say, oh, look, well, there's no God, but we're completely ignoring the context in which something happens. There is sin that happens all throughout the Bible. Does that mean that the Bible condones sin? No. It's describing events. So we have to be really careful in these places. When is it just describing an event, and when is it actually teaching a truth? Because those are two very, very different things. So I think in almost all these instances, It's just describing an event. Jesus is denying being equal with God, but in the event, somebody calls him equal to God.
Right.
So,
so Jesus says, "My Father is always working, and I am always working."
yep,
And for this reason, the Jews were seeking all the more to kill him, because he not only was breaking the Sabbath, in quotes, but was also calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God.
yep,
And I think one first thing to note is that Jesus was not breaking the Sabbath, right?
yep,
Because if Jesus broke the Sabbath, he would have violated Jewish law, and therefore he would have been guilty of sin, and he wouldn't have been the completer of the law like he claimed to be. So, is the Gospel of John saying that Jesus broke the Sabbath, or is the Gospel of John saying that the Jews who were angry with him and seeking to kill him perceived him as breaking the Sabbath?
exactly. That's a great. I should have mentioned that in the video, but yeah, that's a great point. That yeah, literally in the context, they're wrong. He did not actually break the Sabbath. So
Mm,
to go along with their logic and be like, well, therefore he is equal to God, because they think that he's being called equal to God.
right.
No, like in the same context, they're wrong. They're wrong about how he's acting.
Right, because if they were right, then he should be killed.
Yeah,
Right.
yeah,
That's the whole other thing. Was Jesus guilty when he was before the trial, or was he innocent and the charges against him were false or trumped up or fake? And so that's another thing. So I think that even though it seems like, well, Jesus was calling God his own Father, making himself equal with God, that seems like, well, that's saying that's just describing what Jesus said. But I think on closer inspection, you can see that that is an explanation of what these Jews who were seeking to kill him thought or
exactly,
perceived or heard.
exactly.
Yeah.
Yep, that's exactly right.
Yeah. And so then how does Jesus respond, and what does that say about his relationship to the Father?
Yeah, so in my video, I talk about 4 different ways that he 4 different ways in 11 verses, I
Yeah.
think it is, that he's different from God. Like, so, I mean, here's the claim, right? You're equal to God. He denies that claim in 4 different ways. You do not have to say the word no to deny a claim. You can give 4 different ways that you're different from God, and that is also denying the claim. So, yeah, when they claim you're equal with God, and he says the Son is able to do nothing, or is not able to do anything on his own, but only what he sees the Father doing. For whatever he sees, whatever he does, the Son also does in the same way. That's a claim to be different. It's Jesus is looking at the Father and following along with what he does. He's not inherently creating these events on his own. It's not coming from his own power. He's just watching the Father, or he's getting this power from the Father. Um, yeah, I
Yeah.
could go on more there, but
But yeah, one could read this like, the Father shows them what he's going to do. The Father raises the dead and gives them life. So the Son gives life to whom he wants. The Father does not judge anyone, but he's given all judgment to the Son, right? All of these things are basically saying the Father has some authority or ability or prerogative intrinsically,
yep,
and then he has given it to the Son, but this is a received authority or ability,
yep.
and the Son does not have his own willy-nilly feelings to do whatever he wants. He has to be a cooperative, entrusted agent to do what it is that the Father gave him to do.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, this is again the problem with not reading the context. You can take some of these verses and see the equality there, but you're completely missing the fact that all these things were given to Jesus by God. He's just an appointed representative. He's someone who's been empowered by God.
Mm-hmm.
He's not God himself. Yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, it's essentially the entire passage is about how he's
Right.
different from God and how God has empowered him.
Right. And I am not able to do anything on my own. Right. I
Yep.
feel like that's pretty comprehensive.
Yeah, I mean, I just don't. I try to point out in the video, like, can you imagine God saying that? Like, I can't do anything on my own. Like,
Right.
that's not a God. That is not a God. If you say that, I don't
And
care. I don't care if you're in your human nature and you have a human nature and divine nature. That's just simply not something God would say. Somebody who is fully and equally God.
mhm. And all of this stacks up when you scroll back up to verse 18 after reading, say, 19 through 32, basically. And you scroll back up to, for this reason, the Jews were seeking to kill him all the more because he was not only breaking the Sabbath, in quotes, but was also calling God his own father, making himself equal to God. And then when you look at it, it's like, oh, all of those things are Jesus trying to refute that, to defend himself from that accusation. So he's accused of making himself equal to God, even though they don't actually quote it. It's just sort of like this is what they were thinking. And yeah, that's pretty interesting. So let's go to John chapter 10. And so this is the famous Jesus says, I and the Father are one.
Yes.
And then the Jews are saying, you being a man, make yourself a God. That's interesting that you translate it that way. Do you have any thoughts or comments on that?
Yeah, that one's tricky. Yeah, it's tough to know exactly what they're thinking here. Are they thinking that he is trying to, like, because in the Greek context, I mean, these are Jews here, so they might, you don't know, it's hard to know how much Greek influence they have.
Yeah.
But in the Greek context, anybody who does something divine is kind of like a god. So it's hard to know if they're thinking here, like, are you claiming to be a god or are you claiming to be the God?
Right.
I don't know. I think it's a toss-up. We haven't finalized our John translation yet. I could probably spend some more time thinking about if we want to translate this, make yourself God or make yourself a God.
Yeah, I can understand arguments in both directions. Like Jesus says, I and the Father are one. So you could imagine them hearing that Jesus is claiming to be the Father.
Yeah.
And therefore he is making himself the capital G God.
Yep.
But it need not be totally understood that way. Are you making yourself a God, making yourself divine, a deity, or something like that? Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the really funny thing here, can you scroll up to verse 29?
Sure.
So, yeah, I mean, the amazingly comical thing to me is to somebody to read verse 30 and walk away concluding Jesus is equal with God, when in the verse directly before, like the verse just glance up 2 centimeters, it says, my Father who has given it to me is greater than all. And I talk about in the video how when you compare that with John 14:28, and he says, my Father is greater than I, clearly he means himself.
Yeah.
So to say, my Father is greater than all, and we clearly, as again, in the context of John 5 as well, God has given him power to give life. God has given him power to judge. God has given him power to perform miracles. Those are all the ways in which God is greater. So we don't have to ponder, well, is he greater in essence? Is he greater in role? It's just like, it's very clear. He's just greater in almost every way. He's given him almost everything that he has. He's given him life. He's given him judgment. He's given him authority. So I just think to walk away from John 10:30 and say, well, actually, Jesus is equal to God is just mind-boggling. I think you really have to rip it out of context.
Yeah. And this also brings up the repeated theme of the Jews misunderstanding Jesus, especially in the confrontational dialogue scenes. That Jesus is being misunderstood, taken out of context, almost even willfully misrepresented or something like that as an attempt to catch him or get him in trouble.
Exactly. And yeah, so I think, I mean, to me, the absolute clearest statement, I've actually talked to one of my Trinitarian friends about this verse and really kind of tried to press him on this, is verse 36.
Mm-hmm.
That, hey, look, this is the title Jesus is trying to claim, the Son of God. He directly says that.
Yeah.
Not God the Son, or not even God himself, not God the Father. So, like, we don't have to ponder, I wonder which, like, so they're saying you're equal to God. How does Jesus respond? No, I said I am the Son of God.
Mm-hmm.
Like, he literally, I really don't think he could be much clearer. I really don't. I'm not really sure what else you would want from him
Right.
to be any clearer.
So what's your understanding? So Jesus's first responses, is it not written in your law, I said you are gods?
Yep.
Do you think that he's sort of referencing the idea that, hey, from Psalm 82, there's this idea that human judges perhaps can be called gods.
Yep.
And so it's like not completely out of the question to call a human God from time to time if you
Yeah.
know what you're doing.
Yep.
But I'm only accepting a lesser title than that. So how could I be? Do you find that sort of interpretation persuasive?
Yeah, that's exactly what I think what he's doing here is he's making an argument essentially from like, I guess the
Greater to the lesser, or
the greater
something
to the
like that.
lesser. Yeah, it's like, hey, if even Jews in the Old Testament were called gods, little Elohim. I think it's Elohim. I don't know if it's Elohim in the Hebrew. I don't actually remember.
I
But
believe so. I'm pretty sure it is in Psalm 82.
yeah, if they're called gods, that's the logic, right? That's the greater. They're called gods, and they're just humans. But I'm just claiming the title Son of God. So that's even lesser. I'm not even trying to claim the title God. So yeah, he's making an argument from the greater to the lesser. Like, clearly, I'm not trying to be God. I'm trying to be the Son of God. That's the role in my title. So I think it's a really interesting point that he makes here. So
Yeah, it is Elohim for the record.
okay.
But yeah. So I feel like John 5 and John 10 there are probably the clearest. Are there any other places where you feel like Jesus is denying being God?
Yeah, John 8, I mean, the classic John 8:58, people, Trinitarians really often claim his claim, I am. Yeah, we translate it here, I am the one. We might end up translating it, I am the light of the world, because I think that's actually what he's claiming. Because if you look back up to John 8:12, I think it is, or 14.
That's the last I am. Yeah.
He said, yeah, I am the light of the world. That's how he starts off this whole charade with the Pharisees, is that right there. I am the light of the world. Ego eimi. I don't know what the rest of it is, but I know it's ego eimi there. So to me, that's the I am that he's claiming. And so, once we fast forward to John 8:58 and he just says, I am, I think he's just trying to claim essentially that he's the Messiah. He's the light of the world.
Yeah.
And as you know, I am's not a claim to divinity. The blind man in John 9 says, I am. He says the exact same thing. So I am is not a claim to divinity. I think it's like John 9:9 or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, I am he. Exact same words there in the Greek. So, and the thing I always like to point out too is if Jesus was trying to claim the divine title or whatever from Exodus 3, in the Septuagint of Exodus 3, it's actually ego eimi haon.
Right.
And then
I am the one, or I am the one that is, or I am the being, or something.
Yeah, I am the one who is that's probably how I would translate it. But yeah, the one who is there is actually more so the divine title, the haon. Because he goes on to say, like, tell them, like, haon has sent you. Like, that's what it is in the Greek. So he actually doesn't say, like, go tell them ego eimi has sent you. Like, he doesn't actually claim the title ego eimi. That's just part of the sentence. So if Jesus here is trying to claim the divine name or whatever, which I really don't think he is, he doesn't say ego eimi haon. He doesn't say the full name, and he doesn't say haon. He just says ego eimi. It's really a really big stretch to try to make this say that he's claiming the divine name here in John 8:58.
Yeah. I might say I'm somewhat persuaded by the Socinian reading that says, before Abraham comes to be, I am he, with the verb there sort of being indefinite. It doesn't necessarily need to be the past tense, but I won't pick that bone with you right now. Maybe I'll give a presentation at a future conference, and then we can discuss it then.
But yeah, but also, I mean, yeah, verse 59, I mean, this Trinitarians will say, well, they tried to kill him. They tried to pick up stones to kill him. But they would do that to a false Messiah too. You don't have to be God for them to want to stone you. You could be a false Messiah, and they would absolutely want to stone you.
Right. Or he could be angry, or they could just be an angry mob because he had called them children of Satan. And they're just acting completely irrationally, and we don't really need much of an explanation other than it was an angry mob who was already angry with him and had tried to kill him in the past.
Exactly.
It's like you don't need a super precise judicial answer of why they think he is deserving of death.
Yeah.
All right, so I need to get going pretty soon, but do you have any closing things that you want to wrap up with?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think John, I think it's really insightful to pay attention to how Jesus responds in all these places. And also, you have to understand the difference between the descriptive events and teaching. That's a huge difference. You have to understand, is this just describing an event that's happening, or is this actually a teaching? And I think that really helps clear up a lot of these passages that might seem to be calling Jesus equal to God. Because again, from his own voice, he says that he's lesser than God multiple times, actually, in the Gospel of John. And I actually just made a video on that. But yeah, multiple times he claims to be lesser than God. So there's probably more I could talk about, but I don't want to overdo it.
Yeah. Well, anyway, thank you, Johnny, for sharing your story, and keep up the good work over there at the REV translation team, and also keep up the good work with the videos. I feel like you do a great job of being well organized, to the point, but detailed enough to be persuasive. And I think that your videos are really good at being the sort of things that people who are searching for a particular verse or a particular topic might actually click on, and addresses their question with enough detail to get their wheels spinning. I think that that's sort of a missing niche, maybe, or a missing role among the other Unitarian YouTube channels. Not everyone was going to click on my 2-hour rambly interviews with some scholar that they have not heard of. So I feel like I really like your channel. I really like your contributions.
I really appreciate that. Yeah, I really am trying to hit a different niche of, really like maybe Trinitarians who are, just willing to question. It's really for the Trinitarians. That's what my channel is about. And I mean, it is for Unitarians as well, to help them, build up some good defenses for certain verses. But I'm really trying to address, in almost every one of my videos, I try to think about how would a Trinitarian respond to this, and then address that. So that's my goal. I really appreciate that, and I'm trying to do my best for God. So
great. Well, thank you very much for coming on my channel today, Johnny.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for having me.